Discovering the Rachni was an accident that would lead to the invasion of the rest of the galaxy. Unable to fight these bugs and their massive numbers, the Krogan were used as cannon fodder. When they defeated the Rachni, they were honored with statues and valor for their prowess in war. They were celebrated as the saviors of the galaxy, until they weren't. When the Krogan's numbers continued to grow, they expanded beyond their means. Planets were seized, colonies were raided, and many were killed. In response, the genophage was created, and the Krogan were forever changed. Here is the dark history of the Rachni Wars, and how this accidental discovery led to the Krogan rebellions and the genocide of an entire race. After the discovery of the Citadel by the Asari, and then formation of the Council by both the Asari and the Solarians in 500 BCE, it took several years for the Council to expand. 200 years later, the Volus would arrive, followed by the Turians, then Batarians, Elcor, Hanar, and Quarians. But not all races were treated equally. Most would get embassies on the Citadel, but none would stand besides the Solarian and Asari Counselor until they had proved themselves worthy of a seat. Around 1 CE, Solarian explorers were opening mass relays, which had been a normal occurrence as Citadel space was expanding. But this time was different. This time they opened a mass relay to an unknown system that would lead them directly to the Rachni. They were then captured by the Rachni immediately. The Rachni were still in the early stages of exploring the galaxy and had already discovered Element Zero. So when they captured the Solarians, they were able to study their ship that used Element Zero for their faster-than-light drive. And from this and the knowledge they already had about Element Zero, they were able to reverse engineer their own faster-than-light ships, which would finally allow them to leave their own star system. And they did. They expanded rapidly, violently, and in massive numbers. Civilians were killed, planets were lost, and at a little loss to the Rachni. The Rachni, with their new ships and massive bug-like colonies, flooded Citadel space. They were intelligent and aggressive, and any efforts to stop their invasion were met with defeat. First contact or negotiations were impossible, as no one could even reach the hive queens that were controlling these massive swarms. With peace seeming impossible, and with no one knowing the true reasons behind their invasion, the Council assumed that nothing could be done. All they knew of the Rachni was that they were hostile, dangerous, and unstoppable. So they declared war. But the Rachni were too powerful, and their numbers didn't seem to deplete. They were able to overwhelm the Council's defenses, and ultimately had the upper hand with no sign of it changing. It had been over 80 years of this when the Krogan were introduced to the rest of Citadel space, and they would be the key to defeating the Rachni. The Krogan had already been dealing with their own issues, with their own expansion that resulted in fighting over resources and space. And after this erupted into a full-blown war, their society regressed. The advancements in technology had made life easier for the ancient Krogan, so they looked for other ways to challenge themselves, through war and through each other. Ancient Krogan society was no more, and all that was left of the remains were smaller, primitive clans struggling to survive the nuclear winter that they had created. After 2,000 years of living like this, the Solarians would discover these primitive and desperate clans, and from here a plan was formed. They would uplift the Krogan from their primitive and broken society and use them as soldiers against the Rachni. The Solarians outfitted the Krogan with advanced technology and helped them find a planet that wasn't dying from radiation left over from their own wars. The Solarians even built the Shroud on Tuchanka, which was supposed to help stabilize the planet's atmosphere and was intended to be another way to help the Krogan thrive. But underneath its helpful facade was a darker truth. The Solarians had been helping the Krogan to use them all along. The Shroud, the planets, the technology was also that the Krogan would owe them a debt, and their plan worked. It only took 2 generations to bring the Krogan to where they needed to be to serve as a military force. Now, with a habitable planet and all their new technology, the Krogan could finally grow and repopulate, and their population boomed. With these new numbers, the Solarians had what they needed, and now they finally stood a chance against the Rachni, who had been invading for roughly 80 years. So in 80 CE, the Krogan, who owed everything to the Solarians, prepared for war. With their armor and strong anatomy, the Krogan were successful in doing what the Asari and Solarians could not. They could survive the harsh conditions of the Rachni planets and quickly replace their numbers. Finally, after 80 years, the Rachni were being contested. The Krogan went after the queens first by infiltrating their lairs that no one had been able to reach. The council planets that had been conquered by force were taken back from the Rachni. The Krogan continued to push the Rachni back, all the way back to their home planet of Swen. Despite being cornered, the Rachni still refused to surrender. So the Krogan did what they were uplifted to do. They attacked with their full force and bombarded Swen. Cities were bombed, the underground nests of the queens were bombed, and the planet itself was destroyed. The underground explosions caused sinkholes that began making the planet uninhabitable, which usually was against council restrictions, but at this point, the Rachni had become such a problem and caused so much damage with their mindless conquering that the council allowed their planet to be destroyed. They wanted the Rachni eradicated entirely, not just their planet. Total annihilation was the only answer to what they had done, and it was the only way to ensure that they weren't going to do it again. 220 years after first uplifting the Krogan, and 300 years after the beginning of the Rachni Wars, the Rachni are finally declared extinct, and the Rachni Wars are over. To ensure that they stayed extinct, a listening post is left in their home system, just in case. So if there is any Rachni activity, the council can eliminate any potential threats. After this, there is peace for a while. But the galaxy is forever changed. After the cause of the Rachni invasion being from a relay being activated, a new law outlawing the activation of new relays is enacted to prevent another accidental invasion. The Krogan are also welcomed into Citadel space and rewarded for their efforts in ending the Rachni invasion. A statue is even built on the Citadel to honor what the Krogan accomplished for the entire galaxy, meant to represent Krogan values of honor, loyalty, fortitude, and courage. On top of this, the worlds that the Krogan won back from the Rachni are also given to them to continue to thrive and grow. They were seen as heroes. The galaxy was thankful, the council was thankful, and everyone knew what the Krogan had done for them. But this was short-lived. For the next few centuries, the Krogan do as the Solarians uplifted them to do. Their numbers continued to expand rapidly. Now, with them not losing their people to the war, they were expanding unchecked, and their planet couldn't handle it. They quickly ran out of space and resources to support their new massive, growing society. So they needed to expand, and they did, by force. The Krogan began invading other planets, even if they were already claimed by other council races. They were unchecked and uncaring about whose planets they were taking. And when those innocent colonies began fighting for their territory, the Krogan turned their accomplished soldiers on them. They became aggressive and violent against those who simply didn't let them take their planet. Many instances of Krogan hostilities were occurring, and it continued to escalate while the council decided what to do. It was during the 400 years after the Rachni were defeated that the council began secretly preparing to respond to the Krogans and their unchecked expansion, if needed. So in 693 CE, a Solarian becomes the first Spectre. The Special Tactics and Reconnaissance were special council agents who were readying for a Krogan invasion, all behind the scenes. In 700 CE, when the Krogan tried taking over the Asari world of Lucia, the council knew they had to act. If Lucia had been successfully conquered, it could serve as a base for the Krogan to use if they wanted to invade Thessia. The council demanded that the Krogan leave Asari space, but they refused. Overlord Kredak, the Krogan representative, refused to leave, but he was also openly hostile to the Asari and Salarian councilor. He attacked them, saying that the Krogan deserved what they were taking, and they wouldn't leave Lucia no matter what. To stop the Krogan from taking over, the council stepped in and cut off the Krogan supply lines at Thessia's mass relay. Massive casualties would also be inflicted on the Krogan here. This was the Asari's territory, and so the Krogan were defeated and were forced to surrender. But unfortunately, this victory for the Asari was only the beginning of their own war with the Krogan. Enraged by the council intervening, and with their expansion process and the forced surrender on Lucia, the Krogan declared war. The Krogan's use of force and brutality was very different from what the council was capable of, who instead turned to their secret organizations to strike the Krogan in other ways. Salarian STG agents and Asari huntresses were being used to strike the Krogan in secret. They attacked their planet's networks and flooded the extranet with viruses that caused the planets to go dark. They sabotaged antimatter refineries by blowing them up. They blew up headquarters stations with suicide freighters, and they attacked the Krogans in ways they hadn't seen before. But even still, the Krogan numbers were unaffected. Despite all their efforts to cripple them, the secret agents were unsuccessful and were out of options. Pure Krogan domination seemed inevitable at this point. But luckily for the Council and Council races, the Turians had just recently joined Citadel space, and they already had experience with war. By this time, the Turians had already been thriving on their own. They had already discovered several mass relays and had already expanded their own colonies. But all these different colonies became even more and more different. Because of this, they warred amongst each other, which was the catalyst to the Turian unification wars. And these lasted for years, until the Turian hierarchy finally intervened and a delicate peace was established. But these years of warring gave the Turians the experience that they needed to stand against the Krogan. So the Council asked for their aid, and the Turians brought in weapons of mass destruction. Not only was their military experienced, but their military doctrine when it came to war was to annihilate your enemy, not simply defeat them, but instead make sure they could never be a threat again. Initial strikes on the Krogan were successful, but the Krogan then regrouped and planned a massive counterattack that spread across several Turian colonies. These were devastating, and any Turians that remained on these planets were forced to leave, as the attacks made them completely uninhabitable. In total, 3 planets were completely lost because of the Krogan attacks. Seeing how the Krogans operated, the Turians realized they needed to change their tactics, and so they used fusion torches to throw asteroids at the Krogan forces. Their tactics and brutality was increasing as the war was continuing to escalate, but so was the Turians' resolve. On the planet Digeris, Warlord Graken Dahl attempted to invade Palavan space so that he could attack the Turian world. Digeris was only moderately defended, which gave the Krogan warlord an opening. Attempting to bomb the planet, he positioned his navy fleet so that it was between the defending Turian force and the Turian planet, meaning that any stray Turian attacks would also hit their own planet. The Krogan dreadnoughts were extremely hard to defeat, but the Turian fighters and cruisers still managed, and the Turians found a way to defeat the warlord. But still, many were sacrificed for this victory. And with their conventional methods not working to finally stop the Krogan for good, other unconventional routes were explored. After a few decades of the Krogan rebellions, the Turians and Salarians turned to the genophage. Originally, the Salarians who developed it in the first place planned to never have to actually use it, as they knew how devastating the consequences would be if they did. The genophage worked by targeting every single cell and then altering it. This affected the entire Krogan system, and there was nothing that they could do about it. The Salarians engineered it to be foolproof, incapable of being reversed by gene therapy. Instead, when a genophage strain was finished replicating all the genes it could find, it would starve and die off, essentially limiting the possibility for spin-off mutations or contamination. It was perfect and hereditary, and it worked. The Krogans could no longer breed at their normal rates. Now only 1 in 1,000 pregnancies would be successful. It didn't make the Krogans infertile, but instead it affected hormones. It made their bodies struggle to carry to full term. Most fetuses didn't develop very far, but if they did, most often than not, the pregnant Krogan would give birth to a stillborn. It was traumatic, painful, and detrimental to the entire Krogan race. The Turians saw the genophage as the only way to win the war, and once it was finished, they used it immediately through the Shroud that had been built years prior. Not only was the Krogan homeworld affected, but all their colonies and occupied worlds were also infected. Female Krogans could no longer reproduce at the rapid numbers that they were used to. Children became so rare that any female Krogans who could actually have healthy children became prizes of war for the men to fight over. And the women used this to their advantage. One female warlord, Shiagar, was one of the few remaining fertile Krogan, and so she used this to make men compete with each other for the right to mate with her. She used her fertility to build her Krogan band and became the warlord of the men that had joined her. Her bloodline would eventually become a status symbol amongst the Krogan, and her descendants like Nakmor Drak and his granddaughter Nakmor Kesh would wear her clan bands proudly. Even Okir used her genes in his experiments, which would result in Grunt also carrying some of her legacy. But her offspring would be born in the middle of the war, some growing old enough to fight alongside her, such as Drak. And though her legacy survived the war, unfortunately she would not. She was defeated by Turian forces in the last battle of the rebellions on Canrum, but her death only inspired the Krogan. Many surviving Krogan swore blood oaths against the Turians who had killed her. In response to her death, the Krogan also viciously retaliated, and any Turians who were involved with her murder were quickly killed. Several thousand Turians were killed, but it wasn't enough. Despite how inspiring Shiagar was, and how inspired the Krogan were to retaliate, by this point the rebellions had truly ended, because the Krogan were too weak to continue. And because the genophage, they were dying off, so they surrendered. But this caused another divide in Krogan society. Many Krogan warlords went rogue against the surrender and refused. These rebels would be taken care of by the Turians task force, but not all of them. Some Krogans even decided to leave Krogan society entirely and become pirates or nomads. One warlord, Jared, was so enraged after the rebellions that he was one of the warlords who refused to surrender. Instead, him and those who followed him planned to continue their fight, which became a point of contention between the clan leaders. Jared demanded a crush, a Krogan neutral meeting at the ancestral burial grounds of the Hollows, a place of sacred ground where violence is forbidden. Here the plan was to discuss their future plans. He also tried to convince his son Rex to join him instead of focusing on breeding and growing the Krogans. Rex at the time was head of a small tribe, who knew that they didn't have the numbers to continue to fight. So him and his tribe focused on trying to restore order and breeding. Some listened to Rex, but in the end he was outnumbered. Jared, realizing his son was a lost cause, ambushed Rex on sacred ground. His men had been hiding in the graves of the dead, and they killed anyone loyal to Rex quickly. Rex barely survived himself, but he also stabbed his father in the chest, and then left the Krogan system. This would be just one example of the infighting and division of the Krogan after the rebellions. After the war ended, the truth about what some Krogan had been through was also revealed. They had become slaves during the rebellions. Specifically to the Asari, who were using Krogan as slaves to build their camps. The Asari claimed slavery was isolated to a few incidents, but did admit that a small number of Asari commandos did in fact use Krogan prisoners as forced labor. They claimed it was less than 100 in number, and that the commandos responsible for it were subsequently stripped of their ranks and punished. The Asari refused any reparations to the Krogan, despite admitting to it. One Krogan who had been enslaved would later kill himself out of disgrace. The rebellions changed the Krogan entirely, and now the entire galaxy also viewed them differently. The Krogan became extremely resentful at how they were treated. both after everything that they had done for everyone else, but also at everything that had been done to them. Some embassies even wanted the Krogan monument on the Citadel to be removed, but the council rejected the request, believing that the Krogan's part in history shouldn't be erased. They also hoped that preserving the memorial would improve diplomatic relations with the Krogan to help end the rebellions. Of course, this didn't end up working. The memory of what they did for everyone else would remain on the Citadel, even if the Krogan had fallen since then. The Krogan suffered greatly because of the genophage, but while they were at their lowest, the Turians were at their highest. For their success in the war against the Krogan, they were elevated by the Salarian and Asari Councilor and would gain their own council seat. Afterwards, the new council would drop the Citadel Conventions as a way to regulate the use of weapons of mass destruction, which had been used during the rebellions to kill many and to destroy several worlds. The Turians, who now had the full support of the council, also secretly planted a bomb on Tuchanka after the Krogan rebellions were over, a safeguard against another galactic war. No one trusted the Krogan. Instead, they feared what they could do again. The Rachni War and then subsequent Krogan rebellions gave the Krogan great glory and honor, and then took everything from them. And with it, they changed. Their mindset changed. Fatalism and desperation took over. Some Krogan were so desperate that they believed that testicle transplants could increase their virility to counteract the effects of the genophage. And so they would purchase cloned organs on the black market, sometimes paying up to 40,000 credits for a set of 4. While some were desperate for a cure, most gave in to the psychological effects of the genophage. They felt powerless to rebuild their race and society, and many accepted inevitable death and extinction. In the end, the Krogan rebellions lasted from 700 CE to 800 CE, and 90 of those years would cause the Krogan to suffer because of the genophage. Later, they would try different options to create a cure, but it wouldn't be until 2186, 1,476 years later, that a real cure to the genophage would become possible. In the end, the Krogan were almost completely wiped out, but the Rachni were also thought to have been wiped out entirely. And years later, the true motivations behind why they were invading would still be a mystery, both to the Citadel races but also to the Rachni themselves. Some believe the Rachni invasions were an attempt by the Leviathan, building a Rachni army to defeat the Reapers. Some believe the Reapers had indoctrinated the Rachni as a way to make their incoming harvest easier. Whatever the truth is behind why the Rachni were invading with such violence and hostility is still unknown. But regardless, the fate of both the Rachni and the Krogan was forever changed. Krogan history is very sad and full of a lot of death. It's going to be interesting to see where Mass Effect 5 takes them, and we've already seen a little bit of a tease of what the future has for the Krogan. Another Krogan civil war. Let me know what you think of the Krogan's history. Do you think they are doomed to repeat their mistakes? And where do you think they will go in Mass Effect 5? Thank you so much for watching. This was a fun video to make. The Krogan history is very, very interesting. It's some of the best lore in Mass Effect. And I've already started working on a video about the genophage to go over everything that the Krogan went through. So make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and all of those things if you're interested in more Mass Effect lore. A huge thank you to my channel members and my Patreon supporters. Thank you all so much for your support, and thank you to all of you who have watched this video. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.